The 1920s was a decade of materialism and wealth. Men, women, and children were classified based off of how much money they made and where they stood socially. Clothing played a key role in determining a person's wealth and social status. How, you ask? Well, let's see. We'll start with the women. All of the following information can be found at AmericanHistorama.org. Women's clothing styles were based off the ideas of freedom and modernism. With more freedom, women felt that it was acceptable to wear less conservative clothing. Their dresses were shorter and came lower on the waist. Their stockings were rolled below the knees. Their straps on their dresses were thinner. And their swimsuits were lower cut, and they came to the mid-thigh or the knee. Women also felt that it was acceptable to show off their girlish figures, specifically during this decade, the hourglass figure, according to 1920 fashionjacqueline.weebly.com. Modernized styles that women wore were very bold. They wore bright colors with complex patterns, and sometimes the patterns even came from a geometric design. The fabrics that the women wore depended on their wealth. Velvet, silk, and fur were very expensive and harder to come by, and cotton and wool were cheap and always readily available. So the wealthy women wore the silk, the fur, and the velvet, and the poor women wore cotton and wool. So let's talk about the men's styles. All of the following information can be found at thetrendspotter.net. The men's modernized styles were based off of the movie The Great Gatsby, which actually came out during this decade. The characters in The Great Gatsby wore suits and ties, so the men of the 1920s adapted their clothing styles to the characters in the movie. Unlike women, men wore neutral colors, and their wealth was actually based off of the color of their suit. So the lighter the suit, the wealthier the man. If men were not wearing suits, they could have been found wearing Oxford bags, which were just baggy pants, or they could have been found wearing some athletic material or athletic clothing, which was really popular during this time. So let's talk about the children's clothing. All the following information can be found at 1920 fashionjacqueline.weebly.com. Before the 1920s, children's clothing was very similar to adult clothing, but after World War I ended, their clothing changed tremendously. Kids' clothing was now based off of the comfort and the needs of the child instead of just basing their clothing off of adult styles. Most children just wore wool and cotton because it was comfortable and a durable material, but children that came from a wealthier family wore velvet, lace, and silk. Boys and girls during this time wore similar articles of clothing. Boys and girls both wore canvas shoes, which are like sandals, and they both wore cardigan pullovers. Girls would wear loose dresses with their cardigans, and boys would wear suit jackets and ties with their cardigans. And the main difference between the girls and the boy styles was that girls would add accessories to their clothing. So they would wear ribbons and berets and other articles of clothing or accessories in their hair or on their body. So let's review what we've talked about. Women and children's wealth could be determined based off of the fabrics that they wore during the 1920s, and men's wealth could be determined by the color of their suit. So as you can see, clothing played a key role in determining the wealth and status of a person during the 1920s.